Hey, Pastor Nick here. Thanks for taking 5 with me this week. I had the privilege, it's a weird way of saying it, I have the privilege of officiating a funeral service this past weekend. And like many of them, I concluded in the same way that I often do. We finished the graveside by reading one of the most famous of passages in all of the scriptures, Psalm 23. I want to take you there today. David, the author of the psalm, says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Then he goes on to speak about God. He says he makes him lie in green pastures. God leads him beside still waters. God restores his soul and leads him in the paths of righteousness for God's name's sake. And that even though he would walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he would fear no evil, for God is with him. His rod and staff, like a shepherd, they comfort him. And that he prepares a table before David, even in the presence of his enemies. And then he finishes with this, that surely goodness and mercy would follow him all of the days of his life, and then he would dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And then the phrase that I almost always repeat after that in prayer is, "God, thank you, today is a good day, and you are a good God." Certainly, we might understand such a simplistic concept that God is good. However, it seems circumstantially to be the wrong time to say that, right? We can understand noting how good God is after a wedding ceremony, or when circumstances really allow us to see what we want to see in our viewpoint. But to look at a husband and to kids who have just lost a loved one, a mother in this case, and say, "God, you are good in all of this." Sometimes that can get lost by the way that we would define it culturally. But when David says it here in the psalm, he's recognizing that the goodness of God isn't concerned just in a circumstantial goodness, but it's what God provides for us in all circumstances. I mean, you look out at the world today, and there are some chaotic and horrific circumstances going about. If the goodness of God only existed when circumstances benefited us, imagine what so many around the cities and the nation side of Afghanistan must be dealing with this week as you watch just the obliteration of that being the case and the horrifying images that come with that. Where's God in that? Where's the goodness of God? And yet David was not a foreigner to such difficult circumstances. In fact, that's what he was talking about when he speaks of the goodness of God. It's the reasons that God is present in all of those things that makes him so good. That God is the shepherd who would lead him. That God is the one who restores our soul by giving us rest, making us lie down in green pastures, by refreshing us. That's what he meant by leading beside still waters. That not only that, he guides us in the paths of righteousness, what is the right and good way to live our life, and does so for the sake of his great name. And then the most wonderful of all the promises, I think, is even in the valley of the shadow of death, even in the darkest of days, even in the presence of enemies, God is there, and we have no reason to fear evil before us because he is in our presence, sustaining you and I. And not only is he good and his goodness is upon us, but we can trust in his mercy that he provides salvation, that he rescues in the deepest and darkest of places, and that in it we have a hope that we will dwell in his house forever. And so I don't know what your circumstances are today. Perhaps they are wonderful and pleasant. Perhaps you're celebrating the highest of highs. Or maybe, like last week, they are deep and dark and you mourn in the lowest of lows. You can trust in the stability of this, that God is good, which makes today good. And we trust surely his mercy and goodness will follow us all of the days of our lives. And if you're a believer, you trust in that mercy, noting that it will cause us to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What an encouraging truth. I hope you have an awesome week. Thanks for taking 5 with me.